I've given you guys a handout here that starts off with Alexander Hamilton's plans. What I'm going to do is talk for about 7 to 8, maybe 10 minutes max of some stuff that's not on this. And I'll say if it's important enough for you guys to write down in the margins or whatever. And then we'll eventually get to where we talk about Hamilton and specifically his plan, getting the United States off to a good start. All right. So when George Washington becomes president, y'all, he makes that famous quote, "I walk on untrodden ground." Untrodden means what? No one has stepped on it before. Exactly. So what does that mean metaphorically? Yeah, no one's been in this position. Exactly. Thank you, John. No one has been in that position before. He is literally the president, but he's also the precedent. He is setting precedent in everything that he does. And for the most part, he does things pretty well. Now, New York is the capital of the United States, the capital city, right, at the time, while the District of Columbia is being built, right, which the Constitution specifically sets up. We didn't say where Washington, D.C. would be, or where D.C. would be, but we did put it into the Constitution. So Washington gets sworn in. He takes the oath of office. You guys remember Obama's? Well, you probably don't. You're too young. Maybe you do. Remember Obama's inauguration, Trump, Biden's inauguration, the whole thing where they swear, they take a vow and all of that. What's ironic is George Washington was sworn in on Wall Street. Now, this has made some kind of conspiracy-minded people suspicious. Why would they be suspicious that he was sworn in on Wall Street? I mean, what is Wall Street? Huh? It's the center of our financial, it's the center of our finance in this country, right? It's where the New York Stock Exchange is. Y'all have heard of the stock market, right? Yeah, okay. Where millions and billions of dollars are traded every day. And, you're buying stock, you're selling stock, you're doing all that kind of stuff. It is the center of, financial power. And even then, it was pretty important. So here you see a painting from the time of Washington swearing an oath. And he did add the term, "So help me God." That is not actually in the oath, but it's become traditional. And he took the oath there in New York. This is the building where it was. It is long gone today, and instead has been replaced by this building. And if you look right over here, you guys will see a statue of Washington to show you how close it is literally to Wall Street, to money. If you look at this picture here, there is the statue, and it's looking right over at the New York Stock Exchange, right? So literally, president, money, right together from the beginning, if you're a conspiracy buff, right? Now, John Adams was picked as vice president because he'd finished second in the Electoral College. That's the way it used to be done. So imagine if today Biden were president and Trump were vice president. That would be crazy, right? Now, they didn't imagine having different political parties. What they were thinking is, okay, so your guy doesn't win. You're unhappy. But your guy finishes second, and therefore, he's going to be in power quite a bit, right? He's going to have a lot to do. And so it was also about making sure a well-liked person was there in case something happened to the president. And that guy was John Adams. Now, for 8 years, poor John Adams, y'all, is going to be in charge of the Senate because that's the only official duty of the vice president in the Constitution. You and I think of the vice president as, just being there in case something bad happens to the president. We think of him or her having to travel around the world and make guest appearances, go to funerals, open stuff up, But really, the only official power, the official duty of the vice president is to chair the Senate. Now, he doesn't get to debate. He doesn't even get to really talk much, except if there's a tie. John Adams loved to talk, and for 8 years, y'all, that man had to go to the Senate and not be allowed to debate or anything. It was killer to him. All right, now, Washington began so many things. One of the things that he started started a tradition that has remained in force to this day is the idea of having a cabinet. Now, the Constitution does say that the president will have that there'll be various departments, a Department of State, a Department of War. But what Washington did was take it further into creating basically what he called a cabinet. Now this is his first cabinet here. You can see how small it is, including Washington, it's 5 people, right? And John Adams, I don't know if he's even part of it. The own vice president isn't part of that. And of course, it takes its name from like a kitchen cabinet or some place where you would store goods, right? Plates and things. And here are the members of his original cabinet. We won't go into a lot of detail about the last 2, but the first 2 you guys need to know. Alexander Hamilton, first and best Secretary of Treasury we ever had, and Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson, probably one of the greatest Secretaries of State we ever had, although the job then was really more to work in the United States and not to be as involved in foreign affairs overseas like it is today. Now, what's different about Washington, and once again suggests why he was such a great president, great man, great general, is he knew when he wasn't the smartest person in the room. He knew his limitations. And he knew that there were some men smarter than him. And even if those men disagreed with him and each other, he wanted them to work in his government. He loved hearing people argue and debate, and then he would take what he thought was the best answer and work with that. He welcomed counsel. He welcomed advice, okay? And he didn't mind having people who disagreed with him. Whereas some presidents you get today, recently, you get presidents that only do what the president tells them. They are yes men. They are yes women. Like, yes, Mr. President, great idea. Great idea. Yeah, yeah. You know, but he really wanted people to give him good advice. Now, the cabinet today has expanded quite a bit. This is President Obama back in the day when he had his cabinet meeting. You can see it's a lot more people. And they, to be honest, they don't really have that influence on the president that they did on Washington. A lot of them are, in fact, told what to do by the president rather than telling the president what they need to do. He'll ask for advice, but, you know. Now, we're going to talk about Alexander Hamilton here. And if you guys look at the top of your reading packet here, you guys get a little bit of background from Hamilton. Little lion, because he wasn't that big. He was of average height, 5'7" in the day. And he was quite aristocratic, quite arrogant, which is ironic when you think of his background. He was not even born in what becomes the United States. He was born on a little island called Nevis, which is a smaller island to the already small Caribbean island called St. Christopher or St. Kitts. I've been to Nevis a few times, seen his birthplace, such as it was. And the thing is, he was not born to wealth. In fact, he wasn't born to a legal father, right? Nowadays, you know, people don't hold it against you if your mama and your daddy weren't born. That is something out of your control, right? Why should you struggle with that all your life when you had nothing to do with it? But back in the day, it did determine a lot. If you were literally a bastard, and that was a legal term, it meant that socially you probably would never be accepted. You'd probably never go anywhere. And his father, who was married to somebody else, was Scottish, and his mother was French and English, so he had that background. Eventually, they moved to the island of St. Croix in the Virgin Islands. I've also visited the ruins there. of where he was from. And then finally, in his early 20s, made his way to America. Now, as a smart man, I don't know if he's in his 20s, might have been in his teens. Now, a smart man, what is the word? There's different ways to make money. You can inherit it. You can work super hard to get it. Or best of all, you can marry money. And Hamilton married one of the rich Schuyler girls and that, of course, gave him some money. He eventually studied on his own, did a lot, made something of himself, and was an aide to Washington during the Revolution. And in a lot of ways, y'all, I think he was kind of Washington's son that he never had, especially after Benedict Arnold became a traitor and broke Washington's heart. I think in a lot of ways, Hamilton was there to kind of reassure him. And in fact, in one of the last charges at the Battle of Yorktown, Hamilton leads the men that takes a redoubt, which finally convinces the British that it's time to surrender. So while after the Revolution, during the time of the Confederation, Hamilton just watched, y'all, as our economy went down the toilet, had they had toilets to go down. And things were just an absolute mess. And he wrote about it. He played a big role in getting people to come together to write the Constitution. He played a role in writing the Federalist Papers to get the Constitution approved in New York, y'all. So he was a busy man. So when Washington is sworn in as president and he sees the state of the economy, he decides, this is the guy I need to be my Secretary of the Treasury, right? And he will be the greatest. Now, he, of course, has become famous today because of this, the Hamilton musical. Have any of y'all seen Hamilton? Yeah, you have? All right. What did you think of it?
Good.
Pretty good? Liked it? What about you, E? Liked it? And it has done so much for his fame, y'all. Now, when I first heard there was a rap musical about Hamilton, I'm like, great, this is going to be awful. But when I actually got a chance to watch it, I haven't seen it live ever, but I have seen it, on video and stuff. And I saw how accurate, as far as the history goes, the songs. I ended up eventually buying the CDs, so I could get the lyrics and everything. And it is. And I'll try to show you guys a couple of clips, but if you haven't seen it, most of it is available on YouTube. And if you can find the lyrics to go with it, you'll learn a lot of the history. It was based on Ron Chernow's book about Hamilton, which is a monster book. I mean, big book on Hamilton. So what's good is now American kids know Hamilton. When I was a little kid, nobody knew Hamilton. In fact, y'all, in between fifth and sixth grade, my family and I went to the White House, right? We were tourists and we got to go. And here was this big painting on the wall, this very painting here. And the tour guide asked, expecting no one to know, he said, does anybody know who that is? And I raised my little hand. I'm like, it's Alexander Hamilton. He goes, how did you know that, young man? I'm like, because he's on the $10 bill. Okay. And indeed, Hamilton is on the $10 bill. But I also knew Hamilton was Secretary of the Treasury. But I thought it'd be funny by saying he was on the $10 bill. And everybody laughed. Even then, I was trying to tell bad jokes. It hasn't gotten any better. But anyway, y'all, Hamilton is on the $10 bill. And that is relevant because look what's on the back of the $10 bill. The U.S. Treasury. No person played a bigger role, y'all, in getting our economy off to a good start. Had he not done that, we could be in a very different country if we even had a country today. So I found it ironic, 10 or more years ago, when people were talking about taking Hamilton off the $10 bill. I'm like, why? Nobody is more important. There's plenty of other people you could take off of money. Why not take Jackson off the $20 bill? Jackson hated paper money. Jackson crashed the Bank of the United States that Hamilton had created. And indeed, y'all, thanks to the play, thanks to the musical, People have said, no way, you ain't taking Hamilton off the money. And instead, it looks like it is going to be Andrew Jackson, replaced with the Underground Railroad conductress, Harriet Tubman, right? So that's good news for Hamilton. Okay, and I think good news for us. Now, Thomas Jefferson is the Secretary of State, which I said in those days they did more nationally, domestically. Today, Secretaries of State really deal with diplomacy. They deal with our relations with other countries. And of course, he himself is on money, the $2 bill, as I pointed out before. Now, Madison is not an official cabinet member. He was the father of the Constitution and once had been a colleague, and you could say friend, of Alexander Hamilton. The two men together had written almost every one of those amazing Federalist papers to get the Constitution approved in New York. Now, what his role in this will come out really more tomorrow when we talk about the beginnings of political parties. But Jefferson, y'all, is going to be the guy who helps organize the opposition to Washington and to Hamilton's plans. He's going to create what we today call the Democratic Republican Party. Now, understand, y'all, Democratic Republican is a term we use in our time to describe their party. If you had been alive back then, they would not have called it the Democratic Republican Party. They called it the Republican Party. But because we have a later Republican Party that develops in the 1850s that is unrelated to this party, we today put the word Democratic in front of it because indeed Jefferson and Madison's Republican Party, y'all, under Andrew Jackson will kind of morph into the Democratic Party we have today. So I probably confused you more, but just understand it was called Republicans then, but today we historically call them Democratic Republicans. Now we actually are on a panel from your comic, y'all, and we're on the debt, okay? Now, the first thing Hamilton had to deal with was the enormous about $75 million in debt that the United States was in from the Revolution and the Confederation period. A lot of this, y'all, was money owed to citizens who had bought bonds, basically had loaned money to our new government, and businesses that were owed money for various supplies and things like that. But not only was there the debt that the U.S. government owed, we also owed money overseas to other countries. And that was almost $12 million. And finally, the individual states, mainly northern states, owed about half as much as the national debt. Now, 75 million might seem like a lot to you and me today, but imagine what it must have seemed like then, y'all. I mean, that would be $1 billion or more dollars today. Although when you think about it, well, what is our national debt today? How much do we owe, y'all? In the trillions, exactly. How many trillion? 31. We broke 31 the other day. 31. Do y'all know in miles? In miles, it's closer to the nearest star. I'm not talking the sun. The nearest non-sun star than it is in dollars. When we say a light year is several trillion miles. We're not the most indebted if you look at it as part of our GDP and the size of our economy. There are other countries with much smaller economies that percentage-wise are in a lot more doo-doo than we are. They're in like doo-doo. Okay, we're in merely doo-doo. Yeah, to-doos. Yeah, we're in bad shape, yeah. But the others are, some countries have basically defaulted on their debt. What does that mean when you default? It means we ain't paying it back. They just say, we ain't paying it back. We want to settle. Maybe we can give you 10 cents for every dollar we owe, but we sure as heck aren't going to be able to pay it all back. And what do you think that does for your credit when you don't pay back? What happens to a friend that you go to the movie with and every time, huh? You just trust them. Yeah, you got a friend that you go to the movies with. First time she asks you for some money so she can go get a Coke, right? And maybe popcorn. You're like, okay, cool, man. Next time you take me out, right? Yeah, sure. Well, next time you go out, yeah, man, it's like I forgot my wallet. Okay, I'll give you some more. But then she doesn't pay you back. So the third, the fourth, the fifth time, what do you ultimately say? No, I'm not going to loan you money anymore. You're going to pay me back or I'm going to stop. And essentially that's what Hamilton knew. If a country doesn't pay back its debts, it's not going to have respect of other countries, but especially it's not going to have respect of its people, because there will be times, especially during war, that we're going to need our citizens to help out, and they're going to have to loan us money. Well, if we've never paid people back before, or we only paid them part way, eventually those people are going to say, no, sorry, not going to loan you money anymore. And so to Hamilton, it was very, very important that we do this, that we pay off all this debt from the Revolution and from the Confederation. Now, in the middle panel here, y'all, it talks about what Hamilton is thinking, what I've just mentioned. You guys have probably heard your parents talk to you or talk amongst themselves about credit rating, credit score. Have y'all ever heard those terms? If not, start thinking about it. Start building up your credit. You buy a bike, you buy an old car or something, and you start making payments, and you pay every month. I remember I bought a big couch with like a hide-a-bed in it, right? I had just a little apartment, a hide-a-bed. I had an apartment, one room basically, and I had no real credit. So I bought this thing, and every month I sent in like my $43, and eventually after a year I got it paid. So it started building up credit. So the next time I went in to get a loan, they could look and say, oh, yeah, we noticed you bought this thing and you paid it on time every time, and you got it paid in on time. So yeah, we're going to loan you money. We're going to give you a good rate. But if on the other hand, you hadn't paid back for that hideaway bed and they came and repoed it, and then you went out to get a loan next time, they're probably going to say, no, we're not going to give you a loan. Or if we do, we're going to charge you a very high interest rate. So Hamilton knew, y'all, that he had to build our credit. And the only way to do that was to pay back, and to pay back every single cent. So he decides to get our government off to a good start with this 4-point plan. The thing to remember, y'all, from today, the big takeaway is this Hamilton's financial plan, this 4-part plan, is that it is going to be the reason we have political parties today. The reason Hamilton and Jefferson split, the reason Washington and Madison split, y'all, is fighting over Hamilton's financial plan. And we'll get into that in some more detail tomorrow. Now, the first part, as I said, was paying full all the money owed back to people. Now, once again, like I said, there are some countries that can't pay back their debt. So they set up a deal where they will pay percentage. They'll pay what we call pennies on the dollar. So maybe they owe $10 billion. Well, they'll work out a deal where they pay back $1 billion, and companies and businesses that loan to them will get 10 cents on the dollar. Okay? Now, that doesn't really make us all happy, but at the same time, they get at least something back. But it does make us not really trust those countries. So back during the Revolution, y'all, when we needed money, our government sold bonds to people. Now, a bond is different than a stock. A bond is an IOU. So let's say you guys have saved some money up and a friend has some real car trouble. And he comes to you or she comes to you and says, hey, man, I need to borrow a couple $1,000s to get my car fixed. You're like, that's serious dinero, dude. That's not just like, I'm just not going to give you that out of my wallet or out of my desk or something. That's serious money. So you write up a little contract where you say, I'm loaning you $2,000 and you have until X time to pay, right? And that person signs it and you sign it. Now that becomes a legal document. That is what we call an IOU, right? A bond is basically the same thing. The United States government needs money. It's fighting the revolution. All right, I'm going to loan it $2,000. All right, but they give me back a piece of paper, the bond, which says we promise to pay you X amount of money with interest usually. And sometimes even they have a date or whatever on it. That is a bond. So during the revolution, y'all, a lot of our people had indeed loaned money as bonds to the government. Businesses had loaned money to the U.S. government. Now, one of the ways Hamilton wanted to pay this back was by selling new bonds. In a way, I hate to say it, but it's kind of like borrowing on your Visa to pay off your MasterCard, right? Which doesn't work too well. I tried that. But the thing is, they wanted to basically sell some bonds. But also, y'all, if you're going to sell bonds to people now, you have to make sure that people who bought bonds before are taken care of. Because why should I buy a bond and expect to get paid all the money back if you didn't pay back at full, or what we call at par, the other people? So Hamilton made a big deal about, we're going to pay these people back on their bonds. But there was a problem, y'all. Many of the original bondholders, the original people, farmers, average Americans, were not holding those bonds anymore. They had sold their bonds, which is their right. Now, if I sell my bond, I don't get anything on it. Like, let's say I accidentally sold for $1 somebody like a great baseball card. Well, when he sells it for millions, I don't get any money from it. I don't have it anymore. So when you sell the bond, it's gone. Now, why had these people sold the bonds? Well, they had gotten desperate, and some people had taken advantage of them. You know, think you're a farmer. You loaned out basically everything you had to the U.S. government, and now you're waiting to get paid. And it sure as you know what doesn't look like you're ever going to get paid. So people started going around to these bondholders, y'all, and saying, look, maybe not. The U.S. government is going to make it, and maybe it will pay you back. And maybe, just maybe, it'll pay you everything that you're owed on that. But I tell you what, it's your lucky day today, because I have cash right now. And if you sell me your bond, say at 50%, 20%, you can get some money right now, as opposed to maybe getting that money down the road. Now, if you're desperate, what are you going to do? You're going to take the cash right now rather than waiting for a year, 5 years, 10 years to get your money and maybe never get it. So a lot of the people now holding the bonds, y'all, they had not paid, or they had not basically, it was not their original money. And so Madison and Jefferson are like, Hamilton, you can't pay them full value. They didn't pay the full value. But Hamilton said, look, we were in a bad place. We couldn't pay this money back at the time. These speculators kind of bailed us out. They helped out the people who had helped us. Yeah, maybe they didn't get the full value, but they tied us over. And they said, and by the way, the speculators took a chance on us too. They wouldn't have bought that if they didn't think they would be getting their money back. So we owe them the full value. Well, you know, Washington accepted it. Jefferson and Madison didn't like it, but it went through and Congress went ahead and passed it. Now, the next thing was more controversial, and that it dealt with assuming the state debts. Now, the states, y'all, during the Revolution had about $21 million or more of their own money. Now, the southern states, for the most part, had paid back their debt, okay, except for South Carolina, whereas the northern states hadn't. Now, I'm going to give you a little story here, y'all, and Back when I was in college, I knew a guy, I'm not going to give you his name, Bob Darty, who spent a little too much money on his Discover card, right? Buying CDs, that is compact disc, right? And one day, because I lived at home during college, saved me a lot of money, had a lot better food. My mom shows up or has something waiting for me when I come home, and she says, "Your Discover bill arrived today." I'm like, "Okay." And she goes, "And I accidentally opened it." I said, "All right." And she goes, "And I couldn't help but look at how much money you owe." I'm like, "Okay." And she goes, "I have one question for you. Are you crazy?" And because I was several $1,000s in debt. And this is in college. And that was not really smart of me. And so ultimately, they did agree to pay that for me, but I lost my credit card and I lost a lot of my economic freedom. So Hamilton, y'all, is going to be like my parents were to the rest of the states. Like, look, states, are you crazy? You spent too much money. But guess what? Uncle Sam, Uncle Alex is going to take care of you. We are going to take over your debt and we're going to pay it for you. But you owe us big time. You owe us. And in a lot of ways, y'all, this is done to really tie the states to the federal government, to take away some of their power. Now, something I may have mentioned, I can't because I've gone through this 5 times today, is now, if money is owed, if the United States of America owes you money and the United States of America fails, are you going to get your money back? No, right? The people who supported the Confederacy, the people who supported Hitler, right? The people who supported losing sides in war, they don't get their money back, y'all. And so Hamilton had this idea. If you want to enjoy the support of the rich people, get in debt to them. Because as long as you owe them money, they're going to want you to succeed. They're going to be on your side. And so in a weird way that nobody else had ever done, he saw debt not as a curse, but as a real benefit. Now, Southern states had already paid, and they didn't like the idea that they would have to be paying some new taxes, paying for bonds, y'all, to bail out the North. Remember when I gave you guys that example last week of you guys working after school, working on weekends, working on the summer to save some money for college or maybe a trip or to buy a car, or something, and your brother or sister parties, goose off, and then your parents come to you and they want you to pay for your brother or sister's new car or college or whatever, and to you it doesn't seem fair. Well, that's how it was for the Southern states. It didn't seem fair that they, who had already paid their debts, were now expected to help pay the debts of the North. So at this point, y'all, Washington really, or not Washington, but Jefferson and Madison really say, no, we're not going to put up with that anymore. Now, I'm going to talk about this, and this is not on your handout, but I do want you to write some of this down, maybe in the margins or wherever you can fit it. Now, Hamilton, y'all, supported the wealthier people. He was one of them, right? And so he could support them. Now, Hamilton, in some ways, is the originator of what today we call trickle-down or supply-side economics. You will hear me talk about that in the 1920s, and you'll hear me talk a lot more about it in the 1980s under Ronald Reagan. Now, the official title for trickle-down economics is supply-side economics. Now, to this day, this is still one of the major differences between the Republican and Democratic Party. And both sides have a good argument, okay? Now, Democrats traditionally, y'all, believe in aiding the poor, right? Money directly to the poor. Get the money so they can pay their bills, buy their food, and everything. But the problem with that is once that money's gone, you're probably going to have to pay them again. And you're going to have to keep paying them again. It doesn't seem to have an end, right? So what Republicans proposed and what Hamilton originated was the idea that you benefit the people at the top. And eventually the benefits trickle down. They make their way down to the middle class and finally to the lower class. Now, what this is like is, have y'all ever been to like a party or wedding where they got a pyramid of champagne glasses, right? And how does that work? You pour on the top. What happens though when that top glass gets filled up? It pours out and runs into the next two glasses. When those fill up, runs into the next 4 or 5 glasses. Now, to me, it's a big waste of bad champagne, but it's kind of cool to watch. Trickle down is supposed to work the same way in supply side economics. So instead of helping out the poor directly with money, the way it's supposed to work is let's give tax breaks to the rich. Let's, cut, taxes or whatever on them. Now, how does that help some poor guy? Well, this is theoretically how it's supposed to work. I'm rich, and they give me a tax break. Awesome. I've got more money now. What am I going to do with that money? I'm going to spend it, and I'm going to buy stuff. Well, that stuff has to be made. Who's going to make that stuff? Middle-class people, poor people, maybe people without jobs. And so those poor people, y'all, will get jobs making the stuff that I'm going to buy. And, of course, that will create jobs for people to sell stuff to them and so forth and so on. And eventually, it makes family. Or maybe if they give me tax cuts if I start a business or I keep my business in business, I have to do what? I hire people, middle-class people, poor people. And when I give them a job, that can keep lasting for a long time, right? And I don't have to keep paying them every month. Now, a lot of people don't believe that. Like I said, Republicans accept it, Democrats don't. Some of the Democrats call it trickle on. They feel like they've been trickled on, urinated on. Now, the other thing too, remember, as I said, Hamilton promises to pay back at par 100% as well as interest, and he agrees to take over and pay the state debt, which really ties the states to him. They owe him like I owed my parents after they paid off my credit card. Now, the other thing too, y'all, Hamilton, I won't say he was surprised, but Jefferson and Madison, y'all, they drew a line in the sand and they said, look, we accepted, the fact that you were going to do you would pay the debt in full and on par, but we're not going to accept this paying for states. And so if you guys saw those videos I left you the last couple of days, you guys know that they had a party, they drank a bunch of wine, and for the last time, Hamilton, Madison, and Jefferson all agreed. The deal was this: the South would support and help pay for Northern debt if the capital, D.C., would be placed there in the South. Now, Washington loved it, y'all, because Washington just lived across the river. All he could really do, y'all, was watch it being built, because for 10 years, our government remained up in New York. But after Washington was out and Adams was in, we began to open up what we now call not just the District of Columbia, but Washington District of Columbia, made up on land donated by Maryland and donated by Virginia. And of course, by being the South, the idea was we could keep our eye on it and all that kind of stuff. Now, the next thing to talk about here, y'all, is what's called the excise tax. Now, an excise tax is different from just your normal sales tax. You guys know when you go buy a hamburger or you buy something at the store, they tell you the cost of it, then they add tax to it. Well, there are some things, y'all, that we add extra tax on. Now, these are usually items, if you want to speak in the economic means, that have very few substitutes. things that people feel like are virtually necessities. Now, alcohol to many people, y'all, is a virtual necessity. Would y'all agree? I mean, there are addicts out there. So if I raise the price of alcohol a little bit, they're all going to quit, right? No. What about cigarettes? Are there people, y'all, that you would say are addicted to cigarettes? Yeah. So if I raise the price of cigarettes a little, is everybody going to quit buying cigarettes? No, right? So in a popular term for excise tax is sin taxes, because these are things that a lot of people look down on. Oh, they drink. Oh, they smoke. Even gasoline today, y'all, has an additional very large tax on it. You can usually look at the pump and it will tell you how many cents are state and federal taxes. And it's quite a bit is in that price. But it's not added to it like this was your gas bill plus taxes. It's like it's part of it. It's kind of hidden in the price. So we've got to pay for all those state debts. How are we going to do it? We're going to start taxing whiskey. Now, America was very different. Today, if you're a drinker, you have all these amazing choices of alcohols from around the world. Vodkas, tequilas, you name it. Fancy wines and things. But back then, Americans were pretty simple. There was rum from the Caribbean. There was whiskey. There was cider, hard cider, and there was beer. And that was pretty much it if you were drinking. So when you taxed whiskey, there weren't a lot of other choices for people to go to. And it was 7 cents per gallon. Now, this got a lot of people upset. And farmers out in Pennsylvania got upset enough that they actually revolted. Now, this becomes known as the Whiskey Rebellion. And we're going to go ahead and stop right there. And I'll